Morning, everyone. So I'm leading with my Twitter acclaim here, and you can't do a thing about it. It's so cool. We're going to start with a few questions this morning. And my first question is, can anyone tell me what the number 4 fear is in the world? Any guesses? Shout it out. I know I'm not supposed to. Spiders, phobia, sticks. The number 4 fear, and granted the surveys kind of change a little bit, but very often is listed as death. Death. Does anyone know what the number 1 fear in the world is? That's like a no-brainer for everybody here, right? Public speaking. Does it bother anybody here that people are more afraid of speaking than dying? I'm just wondering. There's a little known number 1.1 fear. Does anyone know what that one is?
Speaking at TEDx.
That's actually 0.1 for certain people. Now, the number 1.1 fear, we're going to move through this morning. So, take 2 seconds here and just turn to the odd, strange, bizarre human being sitting next to you and say hello. Okay, don't get too friendly. No chest bumping in the aisles. Calm down. Guys, I have 18 minutes. Okay. So I'm going to move on now. And I want to take you back to a time in my life about 9 years ago. The year was 2001, and it was a pivotal year for me for a number of reasons. The biggest of which is that's the year that I became a dad. And that was the most magical and still the most magical thing in my world. It's also the year I did something a little bit odd. I signed the lease on a 6-year lease on a floor in a building in the city that I lived in with the goal of opening what I hope to be the premier yoga center. Which, if I was a guy who came out of the yoga world, maybe that wouldn't be so odd, but I was a guy who not too long before was a venture capital lawyer in a large firm. So according to pretty much everybody around me, I had no experience, no reputation, no investors, no clients, and no damn business doing this with a 3-month-old baby and a family and a home in tow. Do you think that made me a little bit fearful? Just the slightest bit anxious? The city, by the way, and this is the support that I got by those closest to me. And by the way, the night that I signed that lease, I have to tell you, for some odd reason, I slept like a baby that night. It was really great. So I go to bed that night, a little bit freaked out about what I was doing. Was it the right call? This is my dream. This is the thing that I think is going to make me come alive. Nervous, anxious, can I handle this? The city was New York. The date that I signed the lease, September 10th, 2001. When I woke the next morning, my city was literally in flames. And I was a longtime New Yorker. And what you hear in my voice now talking about this isn't well, yeah, it's nerves about talking here, but that's not what really you're hearing. What you're hearing is, for those of us that were in the city that day, as far from that date as we remove ourselves, it's still right there. It's still right there. And the first thing that happens that morning is my thoughts started flitting between 2 warring things. One was, who did I know? Because everybody knew somebody if we were in the city. Who did I know? Did I know somebody that was in the towers that day? And then the other thing that was bouncing between was, what am I doing? Am I seriously going to launch a business into this abyss of pain and mourning and sadness? And remind yourselves also that at that moment, we didn't know if this was the first of many or if this was it. And as the day progressed, and I was talking to my wife, we started to realize we did, in fact, know somebody who was working on the 108th floor of one of the towers. A father, a friend of ours who was a married father, with a 2.5-year-old and a 9-month-old son. And they had actually just finished with their dream home a few months earlier out in the suburbs. So we piled my daughter into the car, drove up there to their house where there was a vigil going on, hoping for some word that sadly would never come. And as the day progressed, and as people made their way home, it ended up being just our friend, the wife, and my wife and me, and my daughter who was sleeping, the two kids, and the two moms went up and put the 9-month-old to sleep. And they asked me if I would go and read the 2.5-year-old a story. And I remember, it's like I'm there today. I remember walking up the steps, not knowing what to expect, opening his door and seeing him just sitting there. Little flannel PJs, half tucked, his favorite book on his lap. And wondering, who are you? What are you doing here? Knowing that I was a guy who had to now try and just, in some way, make him feel okay. And I sat down and I read the story to him. And slowly he lay back and he fell asleep. And in that moment, as I was sitting there, something in me changed. Something in me changed. There was a realization that this is it. My friend did not go to work that morning expecting never to come home, but it happened. This is our bite at the apple. And as I look back on that moment, there's something that Steve Jobs said a number of years later, in his 2005 commencement speech at Stanford, where he said, remembering that you're going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You're already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. So driving home that evening, my mind is, I'm thinking, okay, going back to the yoga studio and the lease that I just signed, and the huge amount of money I'm about to spend to make this business a reality. Am I really going to do this? Am I really going to do this? It's something that I have to do now because I feel this is our bite at the apple. This is my shot. Am I filled with fear and anxiety? Oh, yeah, big time. But this is my one chance. I don't get do-overs. So as we went home and I made the decision to actually go forward with it, I was asking these questions. I was saying to myself, do I launch my company or walk away, and do I rise above the fear and anxiety? And based in large part at that moment on what had just happened in that room with this 2.5-year-old boy, the answer was yes. And I went ahead and I launched it. And that studio then, over a period of 7 years, grew into one of the largest, most successful studios in New York City, and potentially in the country, where, more importantly than that, I had an opportunity over that period of time to touch the lives of tens of thousands of people, to impact people's lives in a deeper way from around the world. We trained hundreds and hundreds of yoga teachers at the same time. And it became this magical experience for me. And actually, in December 2009, I sold that company. But this whole experience stirred in me something that led me to want to explore deeper, to try and figure out, what is it that makes some people able to just move past fear, to move past anxiety, and actually do these things which terrify them? And what is it that makes people just stop cold? And we're going to go into that, and there are 3 big questions that we're going to explore. But first, I want to ask you a question. I'm going to show you a picture in a second. And I'm going to ask you a question about it before you see it, so you can really focus in on the answer. And the question is very simply, what color are the laces? What color are the laces? Okay. Can anybody tell me what color the laces were? White? Does everyone agree the laces were white? No polka dots? No pink? No? Nothing? Good. So pretty much 400-something people in the room here said, okay, 1 second, white laces. But I have a second question. What about the girl? What color dress was she wearing? What girl? Take a look in the sunglasses. There's a girl lying down on the dock, reflected, wearing a white dress. And the question is, why did nobody notice her? And I've done this, and I've actually kept the slide up for a minute, and nobody sees the girl. Why doesn't anyone see her? It's because nobody told you to look for her. Nobody told you to look for her. And what I started to realize in my exploration about fear is that very often it starts with the questions that we ask and the things that we observe. But also, beyond that, the really big thing is it's about the things that we don't notice, the questions we don't ask, and the things that we don't see that really take that fear and just let it blossom. So I'm asked a lot, and I've written about, how do you handle fear? You seem to be somebody who's moved through it, who's launched a number of businesses, who's changed careers, made huge changes in lives. How do you handle it? And my answer is always a question back, which is fear of what? And the 3 big fears that always come up are fear of failure, fear of judgment, and oddly enough, fear of success. There's a real fear of success. It freaks people out. Anyone ever have, think of a business for a second and say, but if this scales too quickly, I'll never be able to handle the demand and it'll shut me down, it'll destroy my life? It's actually a real concern. But the real thing, the big thing, when you go back to the top 10 phobia list, of these three, the thing that's always on there is fear of failure. And fear of failure can be this devastating thing because we just ask this question. We ask, what if I fail? And then instead of just creating a realistic scenario, saying, okay, this is what happens and I'll get through it, what we do is we create a doomsday scenario. And I know nobody in this room has done this, but you probably know some people that may have done this. You spin in your head, oh my God, if this thing collapses, I'm gonna lose everything. My home, my relationships, I'm probably gonna get thrown out of the country, if not the planet. I'm gonna have to live in the Arctic, they can take away my shoes, I have to eat raw fish for the rest of my life. It's gonna be the biggest disaster on the planet. And then that creates this thing where it shuts us down. It just takes the fear and anxiety and it ramps it up big time. But then we do something even more powerful. We take that doomsday scenario and we hit spin. Nobody's done that either, right? So what happens when you hit spin is, sadly, even though we're sitting in this beautiful university hall and some of the brightest people in the world, I'm sure, are in here, we're so much closer to Pavlov's dogs than we would ever like to think. Because the way our brains work is repetition breeds belief. We can start with a thought, a fact, a scenario, or a vision, and in our minds, regardless of whether it starts in truth, the more we repeat it, the more we believe that to be the absolute truth, the only possible outcome. Not a mental model, but the model of the world. There is no other option. And the more we buy into that, the more we buy into the fact that this is the only possible outcome for this thing, the more we're absolutely engulfed with fear and anxiety, and the more it becomes paralysis. We can't move. We can't move. But there's one thing which is even more insidious than that. It stops us. Our focus on this stops us from asking two other questions, which are mission critical to our ability to reframe fear and move through it. And those two questions are, what if I do nothing? And what if I succeed? So let's go back. We're going to cycle back, and we're going to go through these three questions. What if I fail? Now, it's important to ask this question. You don't blow it off. But in asking it, what I want you to do next time is take that question, and instead of creating a fantastical doomsday scenario, what I want you to do is create a very realistic scenario. What if I fail? Write it out. Create a picture. Make it a movie. Make it as vivid as you can. But that's only half of the what if I fail question. The other half is how will I recover? And give equal attention to that picture. Plot out exactly what you will do to get yourself back. And what most people find is just doing that alone goes a long way towards disempowering the fear of failure, because they realize almost everything is recoverable. It may suck a little bit, it may be hard, but it's recoverable. Take that scenario now, the realistic scenario, set it aside. And then we move on to the second question, which is what if I do nothing? And for a lot of people, what if I do nothing seems like a no-brainer question, but the reality is for most people, the what if I do nothing is the most horrible scenario out there. Because if there's an opportunity, if there's something you're not doing now that would make you come alive because you're being paralyzed by fear and anxiety, if those opportunities present themselves over and over and over during the course of your life, 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now, and you keep backing away and doing nothing, do you think that you just keep going sideways in life and you'll just kind of hum along? If you're a little bit unhappy now, do you think 10, 20, 30 years of doing nothing will keep you a little bit unhappy? No. If you're a little bit overweight now, do you think 10, 20, or 30 years of sitting behind a desk and eating cheesecake for breakfast will keep you the same weight? If your relationships are a little bit tense now, do you think if you do nothing, they'll still be a little bit tense 10, 20, 30 years from now? No. There is no sideways in life. Simple fact is life applies friction. There is no sideways. There's up or down, and life conspires organically to slowly grind us to a halt. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a thing. Part of our job is to apply lubrication and energy to change the trajectory and go up. There is no sideways. So when you answer the do nothing scenario, you create a very realistic picture of what will my life look like if I do nothing. And what most people find is when you track that out 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that is the far more terrifying scenario than failure and recovery. Create that scenario in your head, set it next to the failure and recovery. And now we get to move to the third one. The third one, and this is where we have fun, because so far we've been talking about reframing and disempowering fear and anxiety, but now we talk about hope. Now we move to the other side of the equation. Where am I going? And we ask the final question, what if I succeed? What if I succeed? Right now, I have another question for you. Who in this room is sitting here? Who in this room is sitting here not doing something that they believe in their heart has the opportunity to make them come alive? Maybe it's introducing yourselves to somebody you would like to connect with. Maybe it's starting a company. Maybe it's starting a project, whatever it is. Who is not doing that thing? Who would do it if you were 100% certain you would not fail? A couple of hands. So we've got like 50% hands up and 50% who are in denial, which is okay. So the fact is, what I want you to do now is if you have that thing in your mind, what is that thing with the opportunity to make you come alive that you're not doing because you don't have that certainty quite now and you're freaked out about failing? Close your eyes, and I want you to place yourself 5 years out in the future now, and I want you to paint a picture as if you've already done it. You are there. That fantasy scenario is done. The thing that you thought you couldn't do and you were freaked out about trying, it's done. You're there. You've achieved it beyond your wildest imagination. What does that look like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? How does the air feel against your face in that place? And then I want you to do one more thing with that vision. Now I want you to hit spin. Helen Keller once said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing, and I'm inclined to agree. I cannot resign myself to the notion of living the rest of my life in a vacuum of regret. I cannot resign myself to the notion that I will have spent time on this earth but never having done anything to actually come alive out of fear. And I cannot fathom the notion that in some way, through my action or inaction, I may have taught my daughter, my little girl, to do the same. So as you move forward from this morning, the challenge I issue to you is take that thing that we just put into your mind, that you've been putting off because you're afraid of failing. Take it and bring it present again, and ask the 3 questions. What if I fail and recover? What if I do nothing? And by God, what if I succeed? Thank you.